Okay. I think if we have other folks joining, we can catch them up. But we do appear to have what would be a critical mass. So welcome everyone to the second RAC meeting for the OWEB Division 5 grant program administrative rules. So wanted to take a little bit of time we've all met each other at least virtually on the first RAC meeting, but by way of a bit of an icebreaker, since it's been, I think for our first RAC meeting was at the beginning of summer, and now we're at the end of summer. If you just want to introduce yourself and say one fun thing you're able to do this summer. It can be work related or it could be non-work related. And I'll start. Last week, went up to Hood Canal, which is part of Puget Sound up in Washington, and was able to hang out with the family, and kids had some cousin time on the canal. Beautiful days, and it's a lot of fun. And on the way back, we caught a Mariners game in Seattle. So always great to watch some summer afternoon baseball, and sort of a brief respite from Oregon. So that I'll maybe turn it over to Eric Williams.
All right, thanks, Eric, and welcome everybody. Glad to see you again. Eric Williams, I'm the Grant Program Manager at OWEB. And I guess I'll point to, as an injured runner who's been on the shelf since April, faced the first summer in many, many years where I wasn't running at all. So I had to find something else to do. So I took up disc golf, which has been a ton of fun. And I find it much less frustrating than ball golf. And a completely different culture there, subculture, if you want to call it that. That's very welcoming. Lots of nice people out there doing it. And hey, you're just out on a nice summer day walking around hucking a disc. If it goes in the basket, great. If it doesn't, yeah, you get another basket to try for at the next hole. So that's been a lot of fun.
Great. Thanks, Eric. And I neglected to say that my name for the record is Eric Hartstein. I'm OWEB's Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator. So I'll just go down and whoever I see next, and that would be Shane.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shane Jimmerfield, the Program Director at Lomacatsi Restoration Project. I've had the privilege, the pleasure to get out on the river a couple of times this year. I did the John Day for 5 days. That was awesome. And then I did the Lower Road, the Wild and Scenic section as well. We spent 7 days out there, a lot longer than most people take when they do that trip. We spent a lot of time just hiking and sloughing in camp and indulging in gluttony. It was super. And I don't know if you're all aware, but a lot of that area right now is burning. Very sad.
Yeah, that is sad. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Shane.
Sure.
Let's go to Kobe.
All right, Eric, thank you. For the record, this is Kobe Minton, OWEB's East Region Program Representative, where I work in Baker, Union, Wallowa, Malheur, and Harney counties. And something I've got to do this summer, basically starting on May 25th to present, I've got to travel for real, for both work and for pleasure. Maybe a bit evenly split between work and pleasure. I'll focus on the pleasure part of it. My son, who's a runner and not on the shelf, we followed him around this summer from running events from Seward, Alaska to North Lake Tahoe, California, and most recently we took him down to Gunnison 3 weeks ago, Gunnison, Colorado, where he is on the mountain trail running team at Western Colorado University. So we went down there and spent some time in Gunnison, got to know his new town, and send him off to college. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kelly. Let's go Amanda Whitman.
Hello, everyone. I have been working all summer, whether that be in the office here or in the harvest field. But I'm excited we get to go to the coast this weekend. So that'll be my one fun trip for the summer.
Great, thanks, Amanda. It's a good time to be at the coast.
Yes.
Let's go with April.
Hello, everyone. April Mack, Executive Director Assistant with OWEB. And my fun, I got to go to Montana for a little while, and I got to go do my annual hike-in trip with my cousin a couple weeks ago. But my real fun doesn't start until a couple more weeks when I get to take my bow for a walk for 2 weeks straight.
Okay, thanks, April. Let's go with Amanda Gilbert.
Hey, Amanda Gilbert. I'm the Executive Director of the Coast Fork Willamette Watershed Council. And I was grounded for the first part of the summer. So due to injury, but we did just this last week get to run away for a little bit, and we went to New Orleans and Honduras and Cozumel without our children. So it was a real vacation.
Wow. Okay, I think Amanda, you might have won so far. Let's go Haley.
Hello, my name is Haley Lutz, Executive Director for the Coos Watershed Association. And we have been ocean fishing as much as possible. And we have been fortunate enough to catch a bunch of fish to feed our family throughout the year, and have gotten to see so many gray whales up really, really close while fishing, which has been a super special treat.
Cool. Thanks, Haley. Is there more gray whales this year in your experience?
I have seen more sport fishing this year than even when I commercial fished with my husband. So I don't have any scientific to back that up, but anecdotally, I have gotten to see a ton.
Cool. Thanks. Let's go with Amy.
Howdy, good afternoon. Amy Horsham with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and our habitat restoration programs. And I feel like I want to go down to the Coos and get some free fish at Haley's house. I think probably some of the funnest stuff I did this summer was a couple backpacking trips, notably the Olympic National Park was pretty amazing. Can't wait to go back.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Sarah.
My name is Sarah Zwissler. I am the coordinator for the Salmon Superhighway Partnership. I work for Trout Unlimited. My fun this summer consisted of a 2-week camping road trip in late June to Eastern Oregon and Idaho. And it was super beautiful and very refreshing. And I hope to get back to that area again sometime soon.
Cool. Thanks, Sarah. Jason. Oh, still on mute, I think, Jason. Okay, well, while you get the sound figured out, we'll go over to Will with Klamath SWCD. So I think you're replacing Brian Quick, so who was on this RAC. So why don't you introduce yourself to everyone, Will, and welcome.
Thank you. Will Natividad, Interim Project Manager and I'm the employee, Klamath Soil and Water Conservation District. I actually worked here 4 months ago before quitting, and then when Brian was out of here, they called me to come back in and do some damage control. So here I am, and I went to the Black Hills in South Dakota this summer, as well as around the Badlands, which were surprisingly interesting. Then I'm going to go windsurfing again up in the Columbia Gorge this coming weekend.
That sounds like fun. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Will. Okay, let's try Jason one more time. Nope. Okay. Well, I'm sure you can figure that out here, Jason, and we'll move on. And in the meantime, though, I believe, Jason, if you need to, you can use the chat function if you have a question or anything. And for folks that are viewing on YouTube, we'll go ahead and read that out loud. So as a reminder, we are streaming this live to YouTube right now as the second RAC meeting. And by way of agenda, we have just got finished with the welcome and introductions. We have a public comment piece. We have nobody that signed up for a verbal public comment. We have 2 written pieces of public comment, which we'll introduce here in a moment. We'll start with once we get into the rule revisions, we'll start with the first 4 sections of the Division 5 rules, and walk through the proposed changes on each of those. We'll take a break after that, and then walk through the remaining sections of the rules. So we have this scheduled for 3 hours. I don't think we're going to take 3 hours, but we have that buffer time as needed if necessary. So don't feel rushed at all as we go through this. We'll be deliberative, so everybody has an opportunity to comment on the proposed rule changes. And once we are done with today, we'll see where we're at. If we're in a pretty good spot and everybody feels comfortable with it, if there might be a few just minor tweaks that need to be made to the rules around the language, we'll clean that up, and then we'll send it back out to the RAC for feedback at that point. Any last minute feedback before we send it out for public comment. So with that, I see Sarah joined us from ODFW. Sarah, we just got done with introductions. So if you don't mind, just introducing yourself, as well as one fun thing that you've been able to do this summer.
Sure. Sorry I'm late. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Reif. I'm the Habitat Division Administrator with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Lots of fun things have happened this summer, but the most recent was we took our kids who are going into 4th and 7th grade up to Seattle this past weekend, and took our kids to Lumen Field to see The Weeknd, if you know that pop artist. And so it was a really spectacular show, and our kids' eyes were this big the whole time with the lights and the music, and it was quite the night. It was really fun.
Cool, thanks, Sarah. Way to go, Mom and Dad. Okay, so I'll stop there. See if there's any questions for how the rest of the meeting will go before we hop into the public comments and then the proposed rule revisions. Okay, so not seeing any questions. So moving into public comment, we received comments from the Deschutes Basin Board of Control and the Oregon Water Resources Congress. And the comments, I think were pretty much identical, dealing with easements when it comes to landowner agreements. And we sent the information along to you. I think April did late last week or early this week. And once we get to that portion of the rules, we'll probably be able to discuss those in a little more depth. Okay. So if we're ready, we can move into the proposed changes to the actual rules themselves. So following the first RAC meeting and the discussion that we had on the proposed and potential changes to the Division 5 rules, OWEB staff drafted the rule language that we've put before you all to consider and provide some feedback on today. One question for you, and I know folks can go both ways on this, but is it helpful for me to pull up a draft of the rules and we can kind of walk through it? Or alternatively, folks want to kind of see each other's faces, we could just refer back to copies that we have in front of us, and we could do it that way too. So I'm open to either approach, if there is a preference. Okay, I'm not seeing a preference, so I'm going to try to not show the documents, and we'll walk through things. And again, if there are questions, raise your hand, speak up, and we'll slow down and offer opportunities for questions, comments, feedback on any of this. Okay, I see some chat. Okay. Okay, so we'll just jump right in. So the first section, we'll just start from the top. And so we'll start with purpose, which is the OAR 695-005-0010. This should be pretty simple in this section. So lines 1 through 7, the changes that you're seeing are mostly just cleanup and making sure that the grant types that we have reflected in the rules are current to OWEB's grant programs. But I'll stop and see if there's any questions on the proposed edits or changes to the purpose section. Okay, great. So moving on to the definitions section. So this is 695-005-0020. This is somewhat similar to the purpose section, and that I think most of the changes that we have here are kind of just updating the rules to reflect kind of current reality. And so, for example, in subsection 4, which is on line 16, we have the regional review team being replaced with a technical review team, as that is probably a better representation of the review teams that OWEB has. Regional review teams definitely exist, but they're really part of a broader technical review team definition that that we feel here better incorporates all of OWEB's grant programs. Haley, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a super small question. Line 16, the last word says personnel.
Mhm.
From my understanding, review teams aren't necessarily always comprised of paid staff. Is that correct? Personnel just makes it sound like they have to be a paid staff at an agency or organization, and I didn't know if it was worth making that term more inclusive, if that was more reflective of OWEB's practices.
I think that's a good insight, Haley. I think we can probably change that to designated persons. Do you think that's seen one thumb up from Shane? Okay. Great. Thanks, Haley. The other change that we have here in the definition section is in subsection 5C, and this is lines 26 and 27. So we removed the language around pending commitments of match funding must be secured within 12 months of the date of award. And as we discussed at the first RAC meeting, this wasn't something that was really being enforced. There's no easy way to track, and we didn't really see any value in keeping this phrase in there or the statement in there. Okay, so that's it for the proposed changes in the definition section. And next we'll move into the application requirements. And this is 695-005-0030. And this is the first section where I think we have some fairly significant proposed edits. And starting in subsection 1, and we've done this kind of throughout the proposed edits, is where we looked really close at what the existing language said the board was responsible for, or OWEB was responsible for. And OWEB, as in the definitions, is OWEB the agency, and the board is the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board itself. So we looked at this, at the existing rule language pretty close to make sure that the language reflected the current realities of how the OWEB grant program is operating by way of the board and OWEB the agency. So we made that first change here. The applications must be submitted on the most current form prescribed by OWEB, because the OWEB staff are responsible for developing the grant application language and not the OWEB board. There has been a little bit of discussion at OWEB if the word form on page 30 or on line 33 is the right term here, as the applications, as you know, are mostly electronic right now. And so we might propose an alternative word like format. So wanted just to see if there's any reaction there, or if it's sort of minutia enough that you're okay with really any direction there. Format. Great. So Haley likes format. And yep, makes a good distinction on OWEB's forms on the websites, which have to do with kind of managing for grantees and applicants on managing OWEB grants. So that's a good distinction. Okay. So also in the subsection 1, speaking of OWEB's website, we removed the reference for applications being available on OWEB's website, as they're electronic applications and are available through that interface. Okay, getting back to form, we had a comment from Will. You could also say electronic or hard copy form prescribed. Good. Okay. So the other changes we have in subsection 1, remove the reference to the required attachments, what an applicant may submit additional information. Sorry, my computer just locked up on me. So I'm getting a spinning circle. Great, we're back. Okay, so we've got the, so I mentioned that removed the additional information beyond that what is asked for in the application. So the current application format allows for uploads, and the existing language in the rules is unclear as to what is meant by submitting additional information. So just for sake of clarity, we suggest just dumping that entire sentence. So questions, comments, concerns on that? Okay, not seeing any. So what is now subsection 2, we see a whole lot of red ink here. So we looked at that, so staff looked at this and felt that it was redundant of subsection 1, because we say there that applications must be submitted on the most current form or format, whatever term we're going to select there, prescribed by OWEB. And then the what was subsection 2 really just gets into some of the questions that are found in grant applications, but not all of the questions that are found in grant applications. And we didn't see a compelling reason to keep a subset of the application questions in these rules. So we're proposing just to eliminate all of subsection 2. Okay. I'm not seeing any heartburn there, which is good. So we'll go into what was subsection 3 and the new subsection 2, which is line 57. This refers to the match that we talked about last time. So we discussed capping the match requirement at 25% and then stating that the match requirements would be announced at each grant offering, with the intent here of reducing the match requirement to really just a nominal amount for the grant types where match is harder to obtain. Like for example, stakeholder engagement, technical assistance or monitoring grants. But then keeping that 25% match requirement for grant types like restoration. So this is the language that we are proposing. And I'll stop and see if there are questions, comments, concerns.
Yeah, it had some of our staff look over this, and a couple of our folks brought up the same comment, which was that if match requirements are not known until the announcement is made for the grant offering, that can be somewhat difficult for planning. And how might there be some sort of predictability to what match might be a requirement for different grant types for the purposes of planning?
Okay. Yeah. Good comment, Sarah. We heard a little bit about with that along those same lines during the first RAC meeting. And I mean, I think, and I'll respond now is kind of my thinking. I'll let other OWEB folks also maybe talk about what's on their minds here. But for me, I'm thinking that the 25% would remain the restoration, likely the FIP offering as well. We would have a 25% match requirement at a programmatic level as we currently have. But those other grant types, like I mentioned, stakeholder engagement, technical assistance, monitoring would be down at, basically at $1, because that's our required. We have to have some match as required by statute. But, we've noted over the years that those are difficult grants sometimes to, or difficult for folks to obtain the 25%, to obtain and meet that 25% match requirement, because sometimes it's, especially at those grant types, there's not a lot of other opportunities out there. So we saw this as a good opportunity to maybe make our grant program a little bit more equitable. So I'm thinking 25% as the top, and then the bottom being $1, and there's really nothing in between, at least to start with. But I will let my colleagues at OWEB comment on that as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thanks, Eric. This is Eric Williams. I think what we would likely do is just establish a standard practice for our open solicitation grants, and then the individual project level grants that are part of a FIP. And those two sources make up, depending on how you calculate it, since we've got a whole bunch of new general fund money, but about 80% of our spending plan for our grant dollars. And so those, I think people would have an understood expectation that, as Eric was mentioning, restoration grants would retain the 25%, and then the other types would likely be $1, so that people would understand what the expectations are. What would be different would be for the remainder of the spending plan, the other 20%. And there's a lot of variability in those. And some recent examples are we have funds that really are BLM funds that they're providing to OWEB to fund projects that they've pre-selected. And so those, even though once they come into OWEB, they're technically OWEB dollars, those are already dollars coming from other sources. And so there really isn't a need for us to add a match requirement on top of that. And we've had other similar offerings like that. And so the proposed language here just provides that flexibility when there really isn't a practical case for requiring match. We could set the offering to have a match requirement of $1, if a new offering is more similar to the way that our restoration grants operate, where there are potential match sources out there, it's important to demonstrate partnership participation through securing leveraged contributions, then we can set those at 25%.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Haley, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, I think your comment is really good because it is kind of that like planning and prep piece is really important, but totally understanding what both of the Erics just said. And as an applicant seeing the shifts in OWEB, like you guys are getting all different kinds of money and programs now that have different requirements. And it seems like having the flexibility and rule is really good. But the transparency that Sarah is touching on is really important because we're often planning 1-2 years out for these. So I wonder if you could have the rule be nice and vague like this, but I wonder if OWEB on your guys' grants page on your website, if you could have a match policy document that outlines exactly what you guys just said. And that would give you guys the authority and ability to update that whenever. And then Leilani can just send it out to the whole listserv and update the website and update everybody. That seems like that might kind of hit both things of like maximum flexibility, but also like good transparency to grantees.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, thanks, Haley. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, got the chat from Sarah that would satisfy the comments or the concerns if we did something around having a guidance or a policy document on match on our website. Okay. So then moving on to the old subsection 4, new subsection 3 on line 61. Section refers to the certification question in the application that has the grant applicant certify that those who own property where the proposed project would be implemented are aware of the grant application and know that information submitted to OWEB is a public record. So we wanted to make that distinction clear in the rule. That's just the information that's being submitted to OWEB, at least according to our rules, would be a public record. Yeah, Jason. If you can, well, still can't hear you. So if you want to go ahead and type it in the chat, I'll go ahead and repeat it so folks viewing can understand your question or comment. So the question is, how does this work for our CCAA program? So that's the program dealing with sage grouse and the conservation agreements that landowners have entered into. So I think, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe Kobe, you probably know this too, like what is currently being done on this certification question in the application. I think the SWCDs Yeah, so Jason has clarified the SWC signs for them. And I think this doesn't change that process at all. Okay.
And I concur, Eric. I don't think that this changes that process.
Okay. And then we had the last subsection here, which we had is 5. It's deleted from this section. We moved it to the application processing section, which we'll talk through next. I did want to point out, and I don't know quite how this happened, but there was another subsection that somehow it's just been completely deleted from the draft rules, but it's the one that mentions the small grants and being really relevant for the grant program rules. And I'll pop up my, if I could share my screen real quick, just so folks can see it. It's this here, which applicants are encouraged to submit requests for up to $10,000 for watershed restoration projects to the small grant program. Like I said, we talked about this not being necessary for the Division 5 rules, so we're proposing to just remove this reference. So any concerns there? Great, moving right along then. Okay, so we are in the application processing section. This is OAR 695-005-0040. So starting with the proposed edits are in subsection 2, which is on lines 72 through 77. So we removed the word regular, the grant applicant, and then clarifying that only Oregon institutions of higher education are eligible applicants. So this means that out-of-state public institutions, colleges, universities are not eligible for OWEB grants. And then also clarified that state and federal agencies can partner with an eligible entity to apply, but then removed the language about co-applicants and fiscal agents. And there's a question in the chat about even if the work is being done in Oregon, and I believe, Amanda, you're referring to the out-of-state public colleges and universities, and yes, that is correct. Yeah. So even if the work is being done in Oregon, the out-of-state public higher education institutions would not be eligible.
They can be a partner that is paid with contracted services funds out of the budget on a project, but they cannot be the applicant or the grantee.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Eric. Shane, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I think Eric's comment helped me a lot. I was just also kind of wondering, is there statute support for that? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's where we landed on it. Is we've run into this issue in the past, and it gets back to statute.
Yeah, not to get too into the weeds, but the kind of policy discussion around that was to the effect that public universities in other states are subsidized by those state taxes, and therefore projects funded with Oregon public funds shouldn't be subsidizing work in an institution that's already subsidized by public funds.
Okay, so if nothing else on subsection 2, move on to the old subsection 3, which we have deleted or proposed as deleted, as the grant application is the vehicle providing information, and we want to be consistent and transparent and not have additional information being submitted or requested. Haley?
At our last meeting, I think for line 83, I think we were going to clarify that it's not clarification of information may be sought by OWEB from the applicant during the evaluation process. I think we determined that it's actually the award process, not the application.
Yeah, and I think we actually have some language, I want to say elsewhere in the rules that proposed. I'm looking for it now.
Maybe it is fine because it says clarification of information, which can't, I mean, that can happen during evaluation, but we were talking last time about how if OWEB asks for revisions, that can never happen during the application process. That only happens during the award process. But I think I read that wrong, but I thought when I looked at our notes from last meeting that was where we talked about making that change.
One of the things that's a complexity there is that under the FIP program, when we go through the evaluation process with a technical review team, part of the FIP process is to ask specifically for application revisions in that evaluation process, whereas that doesn't happen in competitive grant programs. And so it's a little bit subtle in terms of the language, but that's the reason for the final phrase there. It says, new information not requested by OWEB will not be accepted after the application deadline. So in the FIP program, we will request application revisions after the initial application deadline. And we do that in open solicitation only for correcting errors, but that does happen in open solicitation as well.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. And sorry, you were on the new subsection 4, correct? You moved on from the old subsection 3 and over to lines 82 through 84. Is that right?
Yeah, I was talking about line 83.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. I was kind of stuck there still on 78, 79. So. So moving, I guess, back up to line 80, 81. So this would be the new subsection 3. Just some kind of clarification here around the technical review teams, and then removing funding as technical review teams can provide recommendations that do not include funding recommendations. And then the language that we just discussed in subsection 4, which is lines 82 through 84. And finally, in this section, we deleted the board, the section here around board ranking projects and selecting them for funding, as that is not the current practice. So any other questions, comments, feedback on the application processing section? Okay, not seeing any, and we're moving a little bit ahead of schedule, and we have a break scheduled. So why don't we take 15 minutes and come back here at 2:10, if that works for folks.
Hey, Eric, I thought I'd try. Can you hear me now on this?
I'm clear.
Sorry about that, everybody.
No problem. Okay, I have 10 after on my clock, so why don't we hop back in, and we're going to go to the grant agreement conditions section. So that's 695-005-0050, and this is starts on line 87. So we had some general cleanup to start in subsections 1 and 2, kind of clarifying language around the board versus OWEB, and then adding in that the director has a role when in certain grant programs where the board delegates funding authority to the director. And then moving down to subsection 9, so we're on line 106, 107. So this is language clarifying that grantees will need to obtain necessary permits or licenses and provide evidence that they were obtained to OWEB. So we took out the language referring to approvals, and then the language said that the grantees had to provide a copy of those permits or licenses to OWEB. We're saying evidence to OWEB. And this is for things where there's maybe a programmatic approval on a particular project that's going through a federal agency, where it may not be the actual copy of the permit or license that the grantee is receiving, but evidence from the federal agency that this project falls under a programmatic permit. So Haley, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, is it evidence of submittal or evidence of approval? It seems like there might need to be a bit of clarification there.
So evidence, so you're saying evidence, not that the application permit was applied for, but that evidence that a permit or license was in actuality obtained?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's very clear what you guys are looking for. Maybe it's that the permit has been obtained. You just might need something after evidence and provide evidence of permit attainment or approval or notification.
Okay. Good. And then, so another question in the chat, could we add notifications since some are not permits nor licenses? I think that the permit or license language, I might want to check with this, but that may have come from statute, while notifications was not referenced in statute. And I think I know what you're getting at too, Amanda, and that, you know, when the notifications serve as that permit or license.
Yeah, it's that gray area. I have a lot of people who like the loopholes. So just trying to close those in my mind.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious what others think on this one.
Amanda, are you thinking about the ODF notifications? Is that an example you're thinking about?
Yeah, that was the first one that jumped to my head.
What comes to my mind on stuff like that, both Eric's, is maybe we need to get clear about what are, just do some playing out, like what are the permit pathways and how they're connected. So my understanding of and I'm not a permit specialist, I'm going to make that clear, but my understanding is, isn't the ODF notification part of a general authorization with DSL? So it's still connected to a permitting pathway. Isn't it some sort of agreement between DSL and ODF? So I'm wondering if all those things fall into a bucket already. Go ahead, Haley, sorry.
Well, we talked about this last time because it's kind of similar for ARBO or projects, like
Right.
Forest Service will bundle all their projects and submit it in a notification that's part of a programmatic agreement between multiple agencies.
Right.
So it, you know, it's kind of related to my comment above, like, you know, I would just be clear of like what you're looking for and be as inclusive as possible with that language, because it is different. Like you get approval if you're, you know, applying for a specific permit, but sometimes when you're doing notifications, it's different. Like you will get some kind of some programmatics, you get some kind of notification back that it's received in a part of it, but others it's just submission of the notification and inclusion in a programmatic.
All right. Thanks, Liz and Haley. And Kobe, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. How would this sound in this sentence if instead of just evidence, we put evidence of procurement to OWEB?
Would OWEB accept a submission email, you know, like a submission email for like Arbor or programmatic? Would that be considered procurement from your perspective?
I want to answer that, but please repeat that question again.
Well, and Amy Horseman, maybe you can provide some clarification on this, but like your suggestion about using the word procurement, sometimes all you're going to see is proof that an applicant submitted a notification or submitted for inclusion in a programmatic. Would that meet your procurement requirement if you use that word and rule?
So I'll try to answer that with my own question. If a district ranger at the Forest Service wrote a record of decision supporting the project and the environmental compliance required, I could use that as evidence of procurement of the environmental compliance requirement.
Other thoughts on that language that Kobe suggested, provides evidence of procurement to OWEB? Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I'm wondering if procurement sounds ambiguous, perhaps we can simplify the language a little bit so that it basically just reads the grantee will obtain the necessary permits or licenses, and we need to still, I think, talk a little bit more about notifications from local, state, or federal agencies or governing bodies and provide evidence of such permits or licenses to OWEB. And I think I'd like to explore a little bit more Liz's comment that seems that in a lot of cases, a notification is part of a, she used the term permitting pathway, and so it's kind of an encompassing term. I'm ambivalent on whether to include the word notifications in that list, permits, notifications, or licenses, or just leave it at permits or licenses. But I think that my sense of it is that notifications are considered a permit, more or less a permit by rule, permit by notification. There's some administrative rule or statute from an agency that's directing someone to file a notification. And so they're satisfying a permit or licensing requirement with that notification.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, Eric. I think it's definitely something for us to investigate a little further. The ODF notification, I believe goes back to the Forest Practices Act and the laws found within. So you have that statutory reference there. But it would be really good for us to dig into it a little bit more, maybe offline, and then get back to the group. Haley.
Yeah, I think it's a really, it is a really good conversation, because I do think it's really important for grantees, like knowing how to meet it. And Eric Williams, I don't remember verbatim what you just said of your suggested language, but that definitely sounded more inclusive to me. And it would, I think it would address the concern about, because like for ARBO, for example, the programmatic, that actually sits with those agencies. So they have that programmatic, and you're simply including a project for coverage in that. And so you're not, it just doesn't look the same as like, I have a permit with my organization's name in it. It simply is just that inclusion by the forest for that. So I think your language, Eric, does mold all of that together. I don't think you'd have to I don't think you'd have to add the word notification. I think how you worded it would capture all of that.
Thanks, Haley. And hopefully, Eric, you remember your language.
Yeah, I'm actually keeping a copy here of the rules, and I put some edits in it to reflect this language. So yes, I've got it.
Fantastic.
I'm doing the same.
Okay. Shane, see your hand is up.
Yeah, what's coming to my mind is kind of two things. One being, in the example of the Forest Service, their NEPA process, where that gives them the authority to do the work. But then there's also what gives the authority to, let's say, in example for Lomakatsi, to then be operating with external funds on Forest Service lands, right? And so those are kind of two different things. Both are necessary, neither of which are really permits or licenses. But the NEPA is, provides the agency with the authority. But then in the case of Lomakatsi, we would need some type of stewardship agreement or something to that effect. And that's usually what we supply is, we provide our stewardship agreement. And that gives us a permit to operate on federal land. So I'm just kind of wondering, it seems like this is really trying to get at that that thing? What gives you the right to disturb soil on this land, right? And maybe there needs to just be some definition around permits and licenses and what those things might look like, because they're going to vary across the landscape.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Food for thought. Yeah, Amy.
Yeah, this has been a really good discussion. I think kind of really highlighting that there are a number of perfectly valid different permitting pathways. And so you had mentioned maybe explore this a little bit more in depth offline and make sure that all of those are recognized or recognizable in the final language. And just want to offer, happy to help describe the processes under some of the programmatic opinions and what evidence we would have to provide. If that helps you guys make sure that the language matches up with the types of deliverables that we'd be able to give the Watershed Council or other folks that we might be partnering with.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that, Amy. Okay, good discussion. Thank you. So we'll dive into that one a little bit more offline and yeah, have some language for the RAC to chew on. So then moving to subsection 10, so I'm on line 109 through 118. So there's a few different subsections of 10. So we're offering clarifying language around landowner providing monitoring access for a period of years not to exceed the project completion report approval. We've talked a little bit internally about making an exception here for land acquisition projects, as OWEB has some different requirements there, including conservation, easement compliance into perpetuity. And so that's in section 10A. And then section 10B, clarifying language that the grantee maintains the project for a period of time as deemed appropriate for the practice to be effective. So sure, there's thoughts there. And Haley, so your hand is up.
Mostly just a wordsmithing practice seemed really odd for OWEB to use. It's like a classic NRCS word, and just seemed a little odd in this context. I looked through just kind of some other rule language. I don't know if project elements to be effective or project goals. The word element and goals seem to maybe more in alignment.
Great. Thanks, Haley. And Sarah.
Yeah, some feedback from our staff that, understanding why you'd want to put a limit on how long a landowner needs to provide access. However, they had some examples of the kinds of projects that take a long time to show whether or not they worked and if they're affected. For example, if you're using large woody debris in a stream to change the morphology of the stream, that can take, upwards of 10 years. And that typically, in their experience in working with review teams, they recommend additional monitoring when it's needed for specific projects. And so just some concern there that that 5-year limit on landowner access may inhibit our ability to measure effectiveness of some of these projects that take a long time to show change or benefit.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. I'm sure others have thoughts on that. And I see Haley, your hand is up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment, but I would just probably provide the same pushback I provided at the last meeting. Like, unless OWEB's going to start funding post-implementation monitoring, that, I 100% agree, Sarah. Like, I think it's a place that we're seriously lacking. Our, post-imp monitoring is not truly showing whether or not a project is effective because these scales are different, but I would really hesitate for OWEB to put that in rule unless you're going to change the funding mechanism and capacity and support for that.
Thanks, Haley. And one thing I was also going to add here. So the 5 years we came at that is that's generally the outer limit of what we're typically requiring currently on OWEB restoration grants for grantees to come out and do that post-implementation status reporting. So it's usually some iteration of years 1, 3, and 5 being sort of that maximum post-project implementation that we're having grantees go out and report back to us on the project. Jason, go ahead.
I would just add, from a landowner's perspective, I think having not exceeding 5 years is it's a good faith effort for the landowners to know specifically what they're signing into before it seemed too vague. So I think this is a great addition, and I think landowners in our area would be more comfortable with this process knowing that kind of language.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I think that makes a lot of sense. A couple comments in the chat. 5 years makes sense because you do provide support for plan establishment up to that maximum period. And then comment that you also have to balance the length of time for monitoring access with what a landowner will be comfortable with agreeing to. So kind of getting to Jason's comment as well there. So other thoughts on Shane?
Yeah, I'm thinking about 10B, and most of my experience with OWEB has been through FIPs, and I'm thinking about dry forest FIP or an oak woodland FIP, and the thousands of acres, the dozens of landowners that might be involved, and just kind of wondering how this might show up in an agreement, for maintaining the project. Yeah. Just kind of wondering what your guys' thoughts are, where that might go.
So I think it would go in the grant agreement with this language.
Yeah, and when I said go, I meant kind of like not necessarily where it would exist in the agreement, but where it might go in terms of the conditions itself, requirements for maintaining, thousands of acres of maintenance across, a large landscape scale FIP. I'm just wondering what that's thousands and thousands of dollars. I'm just kind of wondering where you see that going, that requirement.
Where's it going? Yeah, and that's where I think we want to keep it, relatively high level here. So we do want there to be a commitment from grantees to maintaining the projects in which OWEB has invested public dollars. And that's why we also put I think, leaving it up to that grantee to be that entity that's responsible for determining, whether it be a practice or a project element or goal, when that time has been effective up to that certain point.
So just for context, it's actually, there is a part of the grant agreement that already has it. So I don't think it'd be that much different than, because we're not doing a huge change to the rule here, but the way it's written, there's a exhibit. So if you have agreements under FIP open solicitation, you already have grant agreements that have an exhibit near the back that has cooperative landowner agreement as the title. And the way the bullet is written now is landowner's agreement to maintain the project or allow maintenance of the project over a time period consistent with the grant application. So that's how that language is used before, is the timeline was that it matches whatever's in the grant application.
Great.
So I think it would be similar to that.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Liz. Okay. Other thoughts on subsection 10? Okay. Great discussion. Yeah, thank you. Move on to the distribution of funds. So 695-005-0060. So this is starting at line 125. Subsection, well, we have one minor change in subsection 1, substituting OWEB for board, as we've done throughout where appropriate. And then in subsection 2, we have the removal of the 25% match requirement. And also remove the based on the total board award. Like, this is consistent with what we did above. And I guess this is a question I have for you all, is that based on the total board award statement that we've removed, if you think that should stay, as it is the mechanism for allowing applicants and grantees to know that the match requirement is for the OWEB portion of a project and not the total project amount. So a couple of comments in the chat. Staying would be clear, and then I agree. So I want to confirm that means keeping that language in.
Yeah, there'll be some version of that language that it's just the OWEB award. It's the matches contributed.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, seems to be some agreement that we should retain some of that language. So we'll make note of that. And then going to subsection 3 on line 130. So this is the section dealing with private property and landowner agreements. And our proposed edits essentially replace what did exist in rule with the language found in our Department of Justice approved grant agreement templates. And so this also gets to the public comment that was provided. It's related to this section where the two comment letters expressed concern that irrigation districts and others that may hold easements that cross many parcels of private land, and if they are awarded an OWEB grant, that it would be impractical to obtain landowner agreements across dozens or up to hundreds of private parcels. And I don't believe our intent has ever been to require landowner agreements where the grantee has an easement, but it would be good to clarify this in the rules. So the public comment includes some suggested language that we could incorporate here around evidence documenting legal easement on all lands where the work will be carried out. We could incorporate some of that into subsection 3, or even make a new subsection 4 to get that legal easement language in. So I want to stop and see if there's questions on that, the public comments and the legal easements, or if there's any other questions on this subsection 3 language in general. Yeah, go ahead, Haley.
Yeah, the public comment and kind of how you just articulated it brought up a question for me. Like, we've always interpreted it as, like, in our basin, for example, we have a lot of land that is like owned by someone in California, but it is managed and long-term leased, like 30-year leased by, a local rancher or something. And we've always thought that we had to get the landowner's permission to make modifications to their property, because the requirement long-term goes with the land and the property. And we actually did have a situation, for example, where we had a long-term land manager be okay with something, and the owner was very not okay with it. And so it did seem like that conversation and level of approval actually would be important to OWEB. So I just wanted to bring that up. I don't, the water easement thing is interesting. And I think about that for counties too, right? Like, counties have right of way and easement all over the place, but I would not think it would be best practice to implement a project in the right of way that's going to, modify the land in a manner without getting the owner's approval as well. But the easement, that easement argument was really interesting. So I just feel a little bit more confused and wanted to bring up the things that I was thinking about. I don't have like a super clear answer.
Yeah, thanks, Haley. Other thoughts on this one? Yeah, Amy.
I was wondering, yeah, I thought the comments submitted were really interesting, and it's clear that there may be cases where it's less practical and maybe not necessary to get those individual approvals, and maybe that's something that OWEB staff could have discretion over determining if it's a valid substitution. I just wondered if in these rules, number 172 talks about potential for a waiver of rules. And I wondered, would this situation relative to those comments and some of these unclear situations be one of those where it could be case by case, where you guys work directly with the applicant on which forms are acceptable as alternate to what the default versions are. I don't know if that makes sense.
I'm sorry, Amy, I was having a difficult time. You're kind of breaking up a little bit. I don't know if others were able to hear a little clearer than I.
I think I got the gist of it. So I'm not sure how much you got, Eric, but the part that or the recommendation that I thought is really interesting is that Amy noted that we do have the ability to waive rules. And so maybe these situations, like what we are reading in the public comment, they're more rare. And so instead of trying to build it into the rules for the various reasons that we've heard, is that those special circumstances could be handled through a rule waiver. And Amy, feel free to correct me if I mischaracterized any of your comment there.
No, you said it better than I did, but that's what I meant to say. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Amy.
I think part of the motivation for those comment letters is that in the last session, OWEB did receive general funds specifically for irrigation modernization. And there's continuing conversations about more investment in irrigation modernization. And I think the commenters are likely looking at this as something that's going to become more common than it has been historically for OWEB to fund projects that are governed by these easements that control work in the drainage ditches. And I don't know if it's helpful to think about it in this way, as Haley was describing the nature of kind of long-term leases and highways as two examples. I think in the one case, a lease, it falls short of being a property interest like an easement is. And so I think there's a clear distinction there. The highway one's interesting because I think that in most cases, if they have a right of way, they have complete authority to control what gets done within it. But a drainage easement is a different matter. And a drainage easement, I think, often includes provision basically says you can fix the drainage, whatever that takes. The property interests are clear those ditches and pipes and conveyance systems that carry the irrigation water. So that's the argument there, that in some cases, I think if that were going to remain kind of a rare exception, I think we could rely on waivers. Waivers aren't something we want to do routinely. So we want to think carefully about setting ourselves up to be granting waivers on a fairly regular basis.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I think at least for me, you were kind of cutting in and out as well, but you kind of came back around and it was much clearer at the end. So I think we got the gist of your comment there.
Sorry about that. Not sure what the issue is here.
Okay. So any other thoughts on subsection 3? Okay. So then moving to subsection 4. So this is related to public land. So we're just looking to clarify that OWEB needs to have evidence from public agencies that manage that land that they concur with the proposed project on that land. And subsection 5 is clarifying language that OWEB will not disperse funds on project elements that require permits or licenses until that evidence has been provided that the permits or licenses have been obtained. So I'll stop there, see if there's comments or questions on either 4 or 5. And Haley, go ahead.
Well, it just kind of occurred to me that there's this language here about requiring permits and licenses that we were heavily debating earlier. And the language here is receive satisfactory evidence that the necessary permits or licenses have been granted. I don't know if that's helpful at all in the debate we were having earlier about the whole notification and what counts and doesn't count, but some continuity between those two sections and whatever is decided would probably be good.
Yeah, good insight.
Just to add on that, I've been eyeballing the statute also with some of these points, and just to build on Haley's point, the statute does say presents evidence that the agency has granted the permit or license. So that granted language, if we carry that through, we're being more consistent with statute.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Always good to be consistent with statutes. Okay, so the remaining proposed edits in this section are in subsection now 6. We added as prescribed by OWEB when it comes to the completed fund release form. And then the, again, getting at the match language, so taking out the 25%. In section 9. And we are actually almost done. So we only have a couple other sections, both with some very minor edits. So we have a waiver of rules section starting on line 173, just looking to capitalize division 5 there. And then on line 183, or 184, we have the periodic rules review and program evaluation. And just adding that OWEB, the agency, and the board will review the grant program and the rules at least once every 5 years. So question, just curious as to what the word actual means in line 169 as related to match. It's a good question. I always read it as this is the reporting portion of the project. So as the earlier iteration of match would be at the kind of the application stage. So it might have been a different number than what's oftentimes comes in at the end. So I think the word actual here is, what actually occurred when it came to match on the project, because it might have been different than what was originally proposed, but still needs to meet that requirement.
That makes a lot of sense. It might be worth putting like actual utilized or chart some word next to that to make that distinction clear.
Okay. Yeah, so comment actual versus proposed. Yep. We can work on some clarifying language there. Thank you. Actual realized match. Good. Okay, so that is in a nutshell what we've come up with our proposed revisions to the Division 5 rules, and some excellent feedback this afternoon. So yeah, really thank you for that good conversation. Appreciate the thoughtfulness that you all put into this review and discussion. Yeah, we definitely have a few things I think we need to work on a little bit more, and I want to test something with you all. I'm not necessarily hearing that we need another virtual RAC meeting to go over those revisions. I think if we pull together something and put it in a document and share via email, that will work, but I want to confirm that. Okay, seeing comments that email sounds good. Nobody seems to be clamoring for another virtual meeting, surprisingly. So we'll go ahead and do that. So next steps, we'll get the OWEB staff will get together and work on some of these areas where we had some good discussion today, run that by you all. And then once we have that final draft, we will go out and file the notice with the Secretary of State sometime probably early this fall, and have the public comment period, and have probably a public hearing probably mid fall is my guess, based on where we're at, because we want to bring this to the OWEB board for adoption at their January meeting. So we'll want to have any revisions to the final draft rules in place by probably early January, in time for the board meeting. So look for those public hearings, but in the meantime, like we said, we will run by the revisions that we talked about today. So are there any questions? Okay, not seeing any. I think we're good for today. Really appreciate this feedback. Excellent input. Yeah, you guys are great. Appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll be in touch shortly.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.